All right, our Shelby Lancer hasn't been cooperating here. It still has that miss. It's not enough to where you can't drive it, but it's enough to where my wife wouldn't want to drive it, and that's okay. So let's go ahead and focus on the 89 Lancer Shelby today. It's filthy. It's hardly, I think it's only been to the gas station in a couple of years. So time to get it going this summer. I want to be able to drive both these vehicles by the end of the summer and at least put on a little bit of a show with Lancer representation. So let's go ahead and get the cover off here and see what we can do with it. There she blows. As dirty as can be. Classic Chrysler paint. Peeling right off. Who needs it? We'll get this thing going today. Put in a new clutch at least. Get it to where it runs. Even the bugs don't like it. Yikes. Here are the tools which you might need. I know I did. Remove the intercooler lines and air filter to gain access to the top of the trans. You can inspect the turbo compressor outlet and inlet to check for leaks while it's apart. I rebuilt this unit fairly recently, and it looks to be doing great. There is a nut and bolt, each with a 15mm head that retains the starter. There is a bolt that goes into the trans from the backside. It's hard to get at, and I never reinstall it. I have hundreds of thousands of miles on my cars without this bolt and no ill effects. If anything, being able to pull the starter without getting on the ground has been huge for me a few times. I will say though, you kind of need to have the long passenger side axle and no coolant line to do it that way, but nonetheless, it still works great. Don't forget to remove the speed distance sensor connector at the trans snout and the ground on top of the trans. We'll be using that boss in a bit anyway. You'll have to remove the axles, so pull off the locks and remove the 32mm nut from the axle. After that, remove the ball joint pinch bolt, sizes vary by year, and then drop the sway bar down with either 13 or 15mm sockets or a deep offset wrench, and then use a hammer to pop the ball joint out of the knuckle. If you just want to remove the shifter cables, there are two retaining clips. Use a screwdriver to pop them up a bit, and then you can get them off the rest of the way by twisting the screwdriver in the little gap that's formed between the cable and the clip. Some guys will just remove the bracket with a 13mm socket. For some reason, I've begun to do both for unknown reasons. It can be much easier to access the bracket from the wheel well depending on the model of car. This goes for both the cable clip and also the bolts holding on the bracket. Depending on year, there may be a clip which retains the cable. You have to pry it back and slide it off. It can be a real pain, but it sure beats an E-clip. All right, through the hole in the top there is the 15mm long bolt. You'll need to remove the motor mount from that U-shaped channel in the frame, if you will. And then down here, you can see, hopefully, there you go. You can see that there are three 15mm bolts that hold that bracket to the trans. Some people just remove that and you're good to go. We'll also, over here up front, need to remove that little tab that goes around the bushing on the cable there, and that'll free up the cable. So then we'll have the shifter cables freed, the clutch cable freed, and then I think the only thing else is the reverse switch, because we've got the speed distance sensor and the ground freed up. So getting pretty close here to pulling this trans. All right, don't forget to take out your bubble strut bolt here. And as you look at the bottom here too, you can see that, I don't know, this is there, I guess, just holding on a dust shield. There should be a bracket here. And then there's another one right here for the trans, and there's one up above too. It's kind of a doozy to get to. So we'll see what we do here today in regard to getting this thing supported. Probably put a jack stand with a board under it here, and that'll support the engine. But it's tight quarters, but it comes out pretty well actually. Okay, I did take out the front motor mount also. 15mm bolt here, 18 here, one on top actually, interestingly enough, and then two on the face of the block there. So three 18mm bolts, one 15, and that's about all she wrote there. All right, we got the engine hoist here, and on the 520 555 transmissions, that is your center point for balance on these. It's really nice. They don't have that on the 523 568s, but you can wrap some chain around the body right over here and it works just about as well. We'll have to make sure that the starter comes clear and that the shift cables come clear as we start pulling it. I've got the bolts that I showed you down below on the back removed, and then I also have that motor mount, as I showed, removed. So now I'm going to raise this up just ever so slightly, and I will free up the mounts, actually just the mount for the trans, and then we will take out the bolts here and set it down on a jack stand underneath, and then this should come free, and we'll just kind of wrestle it out. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. We'll set it down on to maybe a dolly or like a wheel dolly or something, and then call it a day here. It really shouldn't be too terrible. All right, well, here is our dirty, nasty old transmission with the throwout bearing in pretty good shape there, but just covered in everything you could possibly imagine. And you can see there I did take off the bracket for the shifter cable, and I should have taken off the bobble strut, but I didn't. It still came out. I had to do some yanking and cranking, but it was just fine. So probably hit this with a little bit of degreaser, but I don't want to go too crazy because I don't want the, you know, while I'm in there to keep this thing sitting here for a week or two. So while I am in there, I'm going to remove the dust shields, because I'll be frank, I never run those, and then we'll get this thing ready to go back in. 6 bolts on here that you need to remove. I just zip them off. When I put them on nice and slow. Because they're 17 millimeter, they are specific to a manual car. They are metric. That was an odd one. And somebody might have been slightly hungover. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but that drill walked all around that hole there before it did anything. I'm not sure what the deal is with that, if that's a machine deal or if that's human error, but it went all wobbly there. So all right, I'm going to get this thing put back in the car. Don't forget your dowels there, and be pretty straightforward. I did clean this off, so you know, whatever. Clean the bolts. I will apply some Loctite, and then you'll see how I torque this thing up too. Not sure how well you can see it, but there's the flywheel all lined up. Should, I believe, be in the correct spot. I don't have a light out here, so whatever. If I have to spin it, I have to spin it. And I mean, bottom line is, if you get 2 of these things to thread in, you're gonna be good. That's great. And then I'm gonna take it to top dead center. When I'm done with this, I will use some red Loctite, torque to 70 pounds. Again, 17 millimeter head on these. They're kind of weird. And I'll move the engine to top dead center, and then I will mark the flywheel, because this one doesn't come with a dot on it. Alright, so you got to torque this and you need to stop it from spinning. Take a small pry bar like so and hold it there with one hand while you use the other hand to operate the torque wrench. This works exceptionally well. Okay, so there we've got the bolts for the flywheel marked, and we're going to also mark the top of the flywheel now. So I've taken the liberty of pulling the #1 spark plug, and we'll get that to top dead center, and we'll make a mark. Spin the engine around by the crank bolt there. Be nice and gentle, go in a clockwise manner. This hole right here, you can see that hole right there is used to help with the timing. When that's straight up, you know your cam's oriented the correct way. And then when you feel in here, and I can tell the piston's right at the top there, not exactly, but pretty close. You can see it's got a little bit ways to go here, but this mark is going to be top dead center then. So there it is. That's how you can tell top dead center. I'm going to mark this with a white paint pen. That way when I'm setting the timing, and I'm not talking about the ignition timing, I'm talking about the cam timing, because when you spin this around, there's a mark 180 degrees out from this one. So that ends up being disastrous if you set your cam timing wrong. Then you automatically have to pull the spark plug and spin it around and make sure it's a top dead center. This way you don't have to do that. You just go ahead and put the white mark on the top. Alright, I hope you can see there that I've got some white paint pen put on each side of the hash. That's top dead center for the number 1 cylinder. And that's going to make it so much easier to set the cam timing. And then frankly, it will make it a little easier to see when the timing light's on there for the ignition timing. So we got that going for us, which is nice. Alright, if you put that little black button in there, it makes it really nice because you can put the clutch alignment tool in it, and now over this, which not with one hand, I'll be able to put the pressure plate, and then I can start threading those bolts, and I'm going to use some Loctite on these also, and I'm going to do 250 inch-pounds. It's 21 foot-pounds for the spec on this, but I've always done 250 inch-pounds because I don't have a torque wrench that goes down to 21 foot-pounds unless it's going to be way too little. So, all right, there it is, fully installed. Torque to 250 pounds each, and good to go. Use the, again, you can kind of see how the clutch alignment tool goes in here. There you go, and then that goes into that little nib that comes in it to go into the flywheel. So that centers up the pressure plate, and you're all good. It's a, I didn't say, but it's a 6-puck ceramic disc with, it's unsprung. I've never had a problem with that, actually. I much prefer the unsprung feeling. And honestly, I've got one in my minivan, relatively similar to this, so I'm very pleased with that one, and I think this one will be just about the same. Okay, I think we definitely met our goal of cleaning up the case a little bit without getting crazy. We want to get this thing back in the car tonight. All right, so to get the old throwout bearing out, well, probably the best way to go is to pry off this E-clip here, pull this lever out, and that'll leave the fork behind. No big deal there. Leaving the fork behind, slide it off, installations, reverse the removal. You can see the new one is just going to have some clips that will be installed, and they just slip right over the fork. Maybe need a screwdriver to get those on there. And the one thing when you're done with this, if you look, if I take this arm and slide it all the way up, you can see how this pretty well comes off. Yeah, I guess maybe you can't see that, but let's see if I can get you back here for it. Not sure if you can see that, but it's definitely off there, and we're kind of getting lucky that it's sliding back on as it goes. But after you get that throwout bearing on, from there on out, you're kind of in a position where you don't want to risk moving this arm up again, because if you do, you can pop the throwout bearing off. Everything else has to come back out. I think that one's only behaving so well because it's been on there for a long time. I used those two studs right there to guide the trans together with the block. Now, you really should do it on the sides of the block rather than these top two pieces here. Those dowels that are on the sides of the block are actually what lock them in place, the engine trans, and is really the way to go. Now, that said, with this, it's a situation where it's going to be hard to get it all lined up. What I did was have my wife turn the crank with a ratchet while I pushed around on it until they would mate up, and that worked pretty well. So, you know, whatever works, I guess. Now we can go ahead and start putting everything really back together. I'm going to put the bracket on the back, and then also probably stick the starter back up in there, do the starter, and then I can do the front motor mount and the side motor mount. So, you know, no big deal. And that's where we'll leave off. The rest of this job really is the reverse of removal. It isn't something the average guy can't tackle with a few bucks and a trip to Harbor Freight if you've got some time. It's certainly not something I ever want to see a guy send one of these cars to the junkyard over. If you have any questions or want to suggest a video idea, please drop a comment in the box down below. Until next time, guys, let's keep these Shelby vehicles on the road.